am reviewing the off-Broadway production of Empire with book, music, and lyrics by Caroline Sherman and Robert Hull, choreographed by Lorna Ventura and directed by Cady Huffman, running through September 22nd at New World Stages at 340 West 50th Street in New York City. If you want to help this show reach new heights, come and visit my Patreon page where you can, for as little as $1 a month, support this show and my classic cinema podcast, Yesterday's Matinee, currently on Patreon and Spotify. The latest episode is Places in the Heart, so go check it out when you get the chance. A link will be in the description. Empire has a lot going for it. It has a compelling New York City-centered plot that will hit the nostalgia feels of anyone who has ever looked at the skyline and marveled at the majestic spire that is the Empire State Building, reaching toward the heavens in all its Art Deco grandeur. If this show is to have continued development after this, with hopes of a Broadway run, narrowing down its focus would go a long way in heightening the drama of the relationships while not spoiling the greater tensions of the story. The mistake of the show is that Sherman and Hull have split the narrative between two leading ladies, Sylvie Lee, played by Jessica Ranville, and Frances Belle Wally-Wolodsky, played by Caitlin Davidson. Just a note, Ranville was out the night I was in attendance, and her understudy, Julia Louise Hosack, performed the role. It's 1976, and Sylvie Lee's daughter, Rain, played by Kiana Kabiri, is very curious about her family's history and wants to work in construction like her grandfather, Joe Pakulski, played by Devin Cortez. Sylvie, who is against the idea because Joe, her father, died during the construction of the Empire State Building, and she doesn't want the same to happen to her daughter. This is not a spoiler, as it is addressed in the first 10 minutes of the show and is repeated multiple times as the show progresses. Sylvie sits with some relics and reflects on her parents, leading us to a flashback where most of the story takes place. Here's where things start requiring giant leaps of faith by the audience, as most of what we witness in the flashback, Joe and his partner Rudy, Sylvie's mom, played also by Kabiri, are not present for much of the action that follows. In order for Sylvie to not be a third wheel for much of the musical, it takes a mystical quality, making her interactive with the characters as a journalist. The intent seems to be that since she is reflecting on the past through newspaper clippings, she steps into the role of reporter. The thing is, once we turn to the past, the musical doesn't become about her parents, instead focusing on Wally, an assistant to Al Smith, played by Paul Salvatoriello. Al Smith being the former governor of New York who had the Empire State Building built, originally calling it the Al Smith Building. And this kind of negates the whole purpose of the first 15 minutes of the show. Is the story going to be about Wally, or is it going to be about Rudy and Joe? And the musical needs to make that decision. It needs to be about one or the other, because otherwise you're misleading the audience into thinking that it's going to be about one thing when it really ends up being about another. Now, as far as I could find, there wasn't any real person by the name of Frances Belle Wolodsky, and I suspect that Wally is a composite of what would have likely been a team of assistants that Al had to ensure that the building was erected in a timely manner. The character is dynamic, with a sense of wit, quirkiness, and verve that, if the show was written 50 years ago, Barbra Streisand would have been the first one to receive a phone call being offered the role. Davidson is fantastic as Wally and takes charge of the story and the stage, dealing with suppliers, politicians, the press, the safety of workers, and her ex, Charles Kinney, who happens to be designing the building, played by Albert Guerzon. So, what about the entire setup with Sylvie and Rudy? Well, that's the problem with Empire. Wally's story is so good that Sylvie's story comes off as an afterthought, with Rudy and Joe's story being mostly sidelined until their duet, Nothing Comes for Free, late in the first act. It's a great song, but I am left wondering where they've been for the last hour. They're there, but they're mostly in the background or present as part of the larger ensemble of construction workers who, by the way, are excellent, as they work their way up the Empire State Building one story at a time with vibrant dance breaks by Lorna Ventura. The story would have been much better served if Sylvie's character and the entire 1976 plot element is cut completely, and we are given more development with Joe and Rudy in its place. This is not a critique against Julia Louise Hosack's performance, which was great. I really enjoyed her. it's not her fault that Sylvie's story feels superfluous. I appreciate Sherman and Hull's desire to celebrate the Mohawk natives who helped build the Empire State Building, as Rudy is a Mohawk Indian, as well as her brother who works on the site with her. But when we factor in additional subplots of an Irish couple, Ethan and Emily O'Dowd, played by Jay Savage and Morgan Cowling, and the various ethnicities that make up the workers building the Empire State Building having to address their prejudices, it's a lot going on. All of this could be refined and developed with the cutting of the 1976 elements and still honor the Mohawk history of the workers who were helping build the Empire State Building. Musically, Sherman and Hull wear their musical inspirations on their sleeves. The number Moxie, a trio featuring Salvatoriello, Guerzon, and Howard Kay, who plays John J. Raskob, an executive of DuPont and General Motors who helps finance the construction of the skyscraper, draws direct inspiration from Charles Strauss and Martin Charnin's Annie, and the closing songs of Act 1, Look-a-Hee, and Don't Look Down When You're Going Up both feel like they were inspired by Alan Menken and Jack Feldman's work on Newsies. Though you can find the musical heritage in Empire, it doesn't mean that it's unoriginal. The score has life and power behind it, breaking up the oversaturation of pop musicals that currently dress the Broadway landscape, and I'd love to hear it with a fuller orchestra if it gets a second life in a larger venue. Empire has potential, but there's too much going on. Wally's story is the best developed, so let everything else serve her story instead of attempting to split it with Sylvie. It streamlined the plot and give more time for the subordinate plots. But I am only one man's opinion, so leave yours in the comments below. If you'd like to see Empire, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get tickets. Also in the description will be a link to my Patreon page. Don't forget to go there if you want to support my work. You can also support this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and click the notification bell to be alerted to future reviews. My next review will be Playhouse on Park's production of The Prom. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the theater.